lecture was the byproduct of someone asking us to have it, so please respond to those. There's no lecture on March 13th because this auditorium is not available. Our next lecture will be on March 27th on employment agreements with representatives from the firm of Shepherd Modern Attorneys. This is something else that I think is really good, teaching you the loopholes when you're looking for a job, what things to look for, and negotiations. So. The next LPCH team called photo shoot is tomorrow afternoon between 1:30 and 3:30 in the LPCH hospital, which is on the third floor right before you enter the main hospital. It is my pleasure to introduce our today's speakers representing clinical research at Stanford, RedCap resources, best practices, and examples. Doctors Andrew Martin and Jennifer Frankovich. Jennifer actually just came from maternity to just be here to talk to you guys. Thank you. Andy, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, or shall I?
Sure. No, I can.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Great. Hi, everybody. Please let me know if you can't hear me, and I'll try to get closer to that microphone. My name's Andy Martin. I'm actually a biochemist by training, but I've always been a computer guy. I worked in pharmaceutical and biotech down in San Diego for a number of years and ran some informatics groups doing drug research. My wife, however, is a physician here at Stanford, and so I came up here to the Bay Area and got involved as a consultant originally with the clinical informatics group, and have since come on full time and help basically folks like yourself facilitate your ability to do clinical research. And one of the things that I do as well is I maintain and support RedCap, which is one product that we're going to be talking about today. Just for some idea, how many people here have used RedCap? Great, so about half. That sounds good. And then with me is Dr. Frankovich, and she's got a lot of applied experience, but she actually does research. I just help people do research these days. And so she's going to give some great examples of the work that she's done. And so we want it to be ask questions as they come up. I may tell you to wait a little while until I answer it, but please feel free to interrupt. Let's keep this pretty casual. I'm a casual kind of guy. All right, so there are a lot of resources here at Stanford to help people do research. But I still, even after a couple of years, have trouble sometimes keeping them all together and figuring out what's available, and surprised when I learn a few things. One of the ones that you should all be aware of is Spectrum. And in particular in Spectrum, there's a tool called Study Navigator. And how many of you have been to Spectrum's website? Almost everybody. How many people have used Study Navigator to file protocols? Great, great, that's good. So you guys are aware of that one. Here's eProtocol. How many people here have used eProtocol before? Everybody, good. So I try to convince people, especially when they're new and coming in to do research at Stanford, that the IRB doesn't have to be this thing that's dreaded and, oh my gosh, I've got to go see them. I think that with experience, it can actually be a pretty quick process when you consider what's at stake. So I encourage people to get familiar with it and embrace it instead of running from it. And then here's my group. We're the Center for Clinical Informatics, and we're a part of IRT. How many people have been or dealt with us before in the past? Clinical informatics. Okay, a few people. So one of the things, if you do Study Navigator and you go through that workflow of all the resources that you need, one of the options, if you're doing data extracts, would send you through to us. But we also manage a number of other services. They're all on our website. And I'm going to give a brief overview of how we facilitate clinical research. And then we're going to move on to RedCap specifically. Since not a lot of people are familiar with us, hopefully this will be new information. So the Center for Clinical Informatics was designed to be the clearinghouse for research requests as it relates to past clinical data. So we've built something called STRIDE, which you may or may not have heard, which means a lot of different things. But for me, it's sort of an amalgamation of all of the clinical data that's available for research here at Stanford into a giant database. It has Epic, it has Cerner, it has historical lab systems, imaging systems. It has all the data that we could reasonably get our hands on and stuff into a single database, a data warehouse, if you will, and make that available for research. there's a blanket IRB that covers our ability to access this information for research and to help other people doing their research with it. So the mission of our group is basically to facilitate research, make people feel good, and we're funded in large part by the CTSA, also funded in part through IRT. We do manage a lot of the secure data resources, and so that's more computer IT stuff. In practice, our consultation group is very small. Right now, there's just about 4 of us, and so we meet on a weekly basis and discuss the consultations that are open and ongoing that we need help on. And then there's a separate group, the Stride Development Group, that works more intimately with the actual Stride data warehouse and building custom applications on top of it. That's led by Dr. Susan Weber, and they're over in Porter Drive. And like I said, we also do the IT, the Secure Data Center. So from our perspective, when you're doing clinical research at Stanford and you want to get access to data, this is one way to look at it. We have this consultation service that sits there in the middle. I'm the pasty redhead there, and that's Gomati. And then we've got, I broke it down into a couple different things that we do. I'm going to briefly, run through these. We've done some cool little one-off apps for research alerting. We do some biospecimen data management. We used to play a bigger role in helping people navigate through privacy and security rules, but now the university has sort of built these into their own separate groups, and so we don't do a whole lot of that. We just refer it off. The main thing we do is we provide people with access to clinical data, and we help people manage that data with tools that are approved for PHI. So as a sort of fun experiment, here's one thing that the Susan Weber's group did. We had a physician that was interested in looking at dog bite victims and trying different treatments. And so originally they found some poor underling to sit there and wait in the ER for someone to come in that happened to be bitten by a dog. That's a lot of waiting and not a very good bang for the buck. So they said, hey, can we listen in on the ADT system, and can we go ahead and page somebody as soon as somebody comes in the front door with a dog bite? It's also been done for snake bites. And so we've set up this real-time alerting system that allows us to listen to the HL7 feeds in the hospital and trigger alerts. But this is very, you can only trigger an alert off one specific piece of information. You can't ask more challenging queries. Like, I want to know if someone had a lab result of X and a diagnosis of Y. That's not really readily available in these feeds. Instead, we have to go to the Stride system and write queries to do that. And we can do that as well, but it takes about a 24-hour delay for us to be able to do that, because we get a snapshot a day later in the case of Epic. And so with those instances, we've done things like someone was doing research on CSF fluid, and so no kid is going to allow their child to be tapped solely for research purposes. However, if they had to be tapped and there's excess CSF that remains, it's good for about a week in the fridge, but the researcher was having trouble figuring out when this was happening and trying to understand, so we were able to figure out who had had the procedure. She could then contact the mother, who's still in the hospital in most cases, get consent, and then get access to the leftover CSF. So that's an example of the second type of alert. We do a lot of biospecimen management. I don't do much of this. I don't know much about it, but if you're interested, you can set up a consultation and we can refer you with the people who do. Like I said, we used to do a lot of privacy and HIPAA compliance stuff. On our website, we've got some interesting links for sort of best practice language. One of the things that we do want to tell people is it relates to doing data extractions. If you're going to come to us and say, hey, I've got this list of MRNs of patients that I've seen, and I want to be able to pull X, Y, and Z from their medical chart, it's really important that you know exactly what X, Y, and Z are, and you make sure that that list is inclusive of everything you're going to need. A lot of times people assume, well, I've got the MRN, I don't need to ask for the date of birth, I can just go look it up in Epic. Well, that is true that you can. It's against the research protocol for you to do so unless the date of birth is explicitly listed on your IRB, and then we cannot deliver you the date of birth unless it's explicitly listed. So we just encourage people to do that, and we have some examples of how you can do that on our website. PHI is the big push. You know, how many people were involved in the encryption debacle of 2013? I was there. I'm actually going to show a few things from it in RedCap. So, you know, this is a huge emphasis. There's just so much pressure being put on the guys in IRT to do what's being done here. I don't know if you saw the letter that came out recently from the General School from Livingston about how the non-medical faculty and staff had a, whoa, don't you try to push that on me moment, which is kind of interesting. But we try to help people do this, and we know quite a bit about it, so if you have questions around this, we're another resource you can come to. So clinical data at Stanford, there's a lot of data. Like I said before, if you think of a giant funnel and you just shove it all into one database, that's what I call Stride, and then we're supposed to be the clearinghouse for getting access to that data. How much data is there? Hey, oh, did you notice I put the new logo on? How many people have seen that? Almost fewer people than have seen our group. That's fantastic. I put that on there though, I'm ahead of the game. So we got all this data, we put it in a giant funnel. What data is in there? You know, millions and millions and millions of data points. And some of the data goes back further in time, depending on the system it was taken from. You know, the biggest upsurge in data was when we finally just tied directly into Epic. When SCH goes to Epic in another couple years, it's going to be really easy for us to pull that in. It's going to be different than the adult hospitals instance, but there'll be a lot of similarities, and I think we'll have much better data for clinical research going forward. Right now, it's a little cumbersome for us to do queries against Cerner.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the typed notes that residents and doctors would write in-house used to not be a part of the Stride database. Is it now? Or, because I know you guys have been working on that.
Yeah, I believe that most of the notes are included in Stride, because you can, in the data review tool, you can do text-based queries on all of the notes for terms, and then it highlights those terms.
Yeah. Yeah, so from my experience, it's always been the dictated notes.
Or the
But we
dictated
didn't have
versus
access to the typed notes, and that they've been working on that for a year, and I just don't know if it's available yet. But,
I don't know the answer.
yeah.
We can run that up to Susan. Okay, so to try and make these talks more interesting, I have put together a colorful assortment of graphics that illustrate the research process. It generally begins with someone having a hypothesis and thinking, boy, you know, this seems like an interesting thing you could do. And so we have a tool called the Cohort Discovery Tool that you can come in, you can use to ask questions that answer how many patients, roughly how many patients have, and then you get to fill in the rest of it. And you can write pretty complex queries, and it helps you sort of identify, do we have enough people here? Is the N right? Is the information encoded correctly that I can ask that question? Then generally, there's an IRB step where you get approval to do that research. And then there's a data review tool where you can look at that data, kind of like a digital chart review, where you can go through the patients and you can look at them and you'll say, boy, I was looking for condition X, and here it just says, you know, there's no presence of condition X. I clearly don't want that record in my cohort. How do I filter that out? And sometimes it's an iterative process, and that's what the arrows are meant to indicate. That you kind of go through and then you realize, oh, I've got so many false positives in my cohort, I need to go back and fix that. You take a step back, you go back and you modify your query terms, you do it again, and finally at some point you get a data extraction, which is a bunch of tables dumped into CSV or Excel files in most cases. It's kind of a gap in my opinion. I wish we were able to take that and build it into more of a custom research database for the question at hand, but we just don't have the resources or funding to do that. And so oftentimes if you come to us with complex queries, you're going to get a mess of files, and it's going to be a real challenge to take the next step, which is one of the reasons why I think about 2 or 3 points in here I bulleted, statisticians are your friends. I mean, nobody likes Ray Belize, but he's really helpful when you're doing research, okay? So while he's here, you got to use those guys, and they help you get your research done, and especially when it comes time to organizing that mess of files. And then the last step, data storage and analysis. You've got all this data, and what are you going to do with it? And that's what I'm mainly going to talk about for the rest of the time. So I think I put, yeah, this is sort of a caveat slide. When you're doing clinical research at any institution, but at Stanford as well, you just got to really think about where this data came from. Oftentimes you have a question that one would think would be very simple, and if we had better legal guidance on how to store data, and it wasn't all for billing, and we weren't so hyper-paranoid about security, I think we would, but as a result, we have really complex data in our EMR that's oftentimes coded in about as obscure fashion as possible to do clinical research. Then we have a tertiary care hospital that we're pulling most of this data from, so trying to come up with control cohorts to understand the baseline of all the different things can be a real challenge. A lot of the data in the EMR is incomplete or missing. you know those physicians, they don't know what form or what field to put any of the data in, and so they just type it in, and so you never know what you're gonna get. And so all these things come and make data queries a real challenge. So when you're trying to come up with a query that describes a cohort of patients, usually you have to really think about it in a number of different angles and say A, B, or C, or D, maybe F, and you come up with all these different Boolean aggregations of potential patients that meet your criteria. And once again, Ray is your friend. All right, so any questions so far? All right, so the cohort discovery tool, this is the red bar indicating we're talking about it on the bottom. This is the tool that lets you anonymously play around. There's a link to it right here. Hopefully we can make these slides available afterwards. You guys should all be able to go in there. I think the hospital and the School of Medicine has officially coalesced their HIPAA training modules, so you no longer have to, in addition to the hospital HIPAA training, take the School of Medicine's HIPAA training, which is a big time saver. So go ahead and use this tool. It's fun to ask questions and, you know, see if you can guess ICD-9 codes. IRB and privacy review. This is that intermediate step. So you've asked the question, you think Stanford has the data, you now want to go and get approval to go and pull that data and look at it for real. And so every research, at one point or another, you're going to have to go through this step. Some people try to skirt around it at first and wait and wait and wait, and we just encourage people to tackle it early, get it done with, and then make a few amendments down the way if you need to. Cohort data review, this is that tool that helps you to take that cohort and go through the digital chart review. Once again, there's two versions of it. There's a Java version and there's a new HTML5 version that runs pretty slick. Garrick, the main web developer on this, is really a bright guy that's done a great job and is open to feedback. And so if you guys have things that you want to have, it's an iterative process. They're still making it better. Feel free to give feedback back to us. And there are links also on our webpage for how to run that tool. So I've just illustrated one example of how you can get data. This is this generate a hypothesis, do a data extraction, and now you've got it. But there are many other ways. In fact, probably the majority of the ways that you're getting data are not this method. You might be just doing surveys, either on paper or electronic. You could go ahead and be doing a retrospective chart review where you're not even going to go through Stride because the data is just so complicated. You need to look and pull the charts and go ahead and go through them one by one to pull out the pieces of information you want to record. A lot of groups have existing databases, especially the big labs that have been around for a while, have these really horrid FileMaker Pro databases. And they come and they say, hey, come save us. We've got columns here that have all of this patient information, and for some of the rows, the weight is in kilograms, and for some of the rows, it's in pounds, and for some of the rows, it's in text. And so go ahead and help us analyze this data, and that's a real challenge. And so a lot of what we do is we try to help people clean up a lot of these historical systems. And then a lot of people just have Excel files. They kept it real simple. They've got a file on their encrypted laptop. They go ahead and they put their data in. These all work to some extent, but REDCap is a tool that can help make these things work better or replace the parts that don't work. And if you're working with PHI here in the School of Medicine, there's only a handful of places where you're technically allowed to do so. So in terms of hosted services, REDCap and then Qualtrics are the only two places that you are allowed to do research with PHI, really, that we deal with. Coming soon, hopefully in the next month or two, is going to be the secure box installation. It's going to be totally different than your existing box. You're going to have to migrate over. It's going to have a Big Brother component that looks at your computer to make sure it's encrypted before you can even open it up. So it's going to be nice. I think it's going to really transform working with PHI in the hospitals and the school, but it's not quite there yet. Locally, as long as your device is encrypted, you can have these Excel files, access FileMaker Pro, but there are some real downsides of doing that. And then just a reminder that you're never allowed to put PHI on any service that Stanford doesn't have an existing DA agreement with. And sometimes these can really sneak up on you. Some of your backup services, if they're not fully encrypted for your personal devices, if you have PHI on those, that could be a violation. Gmail, it's a real challenge in the School of Medicine when we work with people that are undergrads, because they have Stanford Gmail accounts. And secure email doesn't really work right with the Stanford undergrad accounts. There's a lot of things that basically you have to be very careful because it's easy to inadvertently violate some of those. Yeah?
I just want to make one comment. Is anybody using Qualtrics or having used it? Okay. So because our only options really are RedCap and Qualtrics for these clinical studies, I recently was working with a colleague that decided to use Qualtrics, and one major downside is once you enter the data, you can't, and you confirm that you've entered it, you can't change it. So if you have a medical student or somebody else working on it and they enter the data and they make a mistake and you go back and audit it, there's no way to change it. So it's, that's a big downside. So I recommend RedCap. We're actually migrating all the data from Qualtrics into RedCap for that project.
Yeah, the really only use case for Qualtrics is for beautiful surveys.
Yes.
If you're sending out a
Yes.
large survey to people, and it's just really important that you have, you know, total control over the CSS and the formatting of the survey, Qualtrics gives you that. And they also give you a couple of really fancy question types. But if you're doing data storage or data entry, then RedCap is your best solution.
Can RedCap do a survey?
Yes, it can.
How do you take the survey, enter it?
And
Is
if
there a
you-
way to like mail it, email
Yep.
it to someone and have it?
If you have a mobile phone, in 10 minutes, you will be
Yeah.
able to figure that out. All right, so here we are, a rapid introduction.
Sorry, I just had a
Oh.
question. For the secure box, do you happen to know that if you're currently using the MedWiki, secure MedWiki, if it's easy to transfer once the box is available?
I mean, the secure MedWiki, you can download a page, and then you could save it like as a Word file and put it in your Box account, but there's gonna be nothing beyond that. I don't think there's a way to like download an entire directory tree in the wiki. Yeah, the secure MedWiki is another place where you can put PHI, but I don't include it because it's not really for research. I mean, it's a place where you wanna have a poster of like the active patients in your group, or you wanna have like a digital whiteboard that has PHI. The secure MedWiki is okay, but if you're really just grabbing data, you know, it doesn't make sense to upload an Excel file to it, download it, make your changes, and upload it, and hope that no one else downloaded it while you were making changes to your version. Otherwise, you've now got two versions that are out of date. All right, so rapid introduction to RedCap at Stanford. So a little bit about RedCap. It's a secure web-based application. It's a PHP app. It's pretty simple. It's been built by a development team in Vanderbilt that's still under active development, but it's a very small group. There's really only, we call it the Royal We, Rob Taylor. He's pretty much the only developer. He gets help every once in a while. Somebody will come on for 6 months before they get hired away to some other project. But it's amazing what he's done over the years. So this is from 2012. This was an older slide deck I had about how many institutions were using RedCap. And you can see over there, it's really taken on internationally as of late. Around 50,000 users, 36,000 projects. Those are production projects, not just development projects. And then I updated the slide. Oh no, here's the project model. You know, it looks like if you're starting your startup company and you show your revenue in your business plan, the hockey stick right there. But this is actually real data. And so I updated it, and look what's happened just in the past year and a half. It's pretty astounding, the growth rate that it's achieving. And the hockey stick is now just a really long blade, but it's still maintaining that really fast growth, if not, in fact, accelerating further. And then the map of who's using RedCap, it's really a global product now. It's all over the place. There are translations in a number of different languages. The most recent version introduced a whole bunch of date formatting. There's all the poor folks that don't live in the US, that don't use month, day, year formatting. We're still stuck with that as the default. So there's been a lot of changes, and the product continues to mature slowly. And we also provide a lot of feedback into Rob and the team about what features to add. So we do have some sway if you guys come in and say, boy, this is really a great idea. Odds are pretty good that within a few months, that might come out in the production version. So Stanford also has a good history with RedCap. So in 2013, we won the RedCap Cup, which meant we had the most user growth of any other institute in the consortium. Unfortunately, when the RedCap trophy arrived, it was badly damaged and broken. And so we had to take it down into LKSC and break out the rivet gun. If you can see that there, you know, retractors. I think we got a ratchet there that Todd's got going to work on the top. And we were able to get it fixed and keep it away from Rodin's, the gates of hell there, we're in good shape. So what is so great about REDCap? Why is it growing like this? Well, it's approved for PHI. It can actually be made Part 21, Part 11 compliant. We aren't that way, but it can be done. And the common thing that people say, was most people come to us with Excel, is you solve the Excel problem. And the main Excel problem is that you cannot really collaboratively work on a document, and you don't have auditing and change history about what's going on with your document. And very few people use validation in Microsoft Excel. They just start typing in the cell. And so as a result, like I mentioned earlier, you see date columns where sometimes it's year, month, day, sometimes it's month, day, sometimes it's year, sometimes it's pink, and you just don't know what that means. And so REDCap helps you avoid those sort of shortcuts to data entry. It's very usable. I think most people, you guys have touched it, you played around with it. There's help and training videos that are tolerable. And there's a large repository of public instruments I'll show you quickly. There's a lot of data validation. You can export and work in a number of analytic software packages. And there are some new advanced features that have come along in the past year and a half that have really added power to REDCap. The biggest ones being custom plugins and the API. So you can now build other programs, examples of which being like custom scoring algorithms for these complex surveys that you might give to determine someone's ranking on some depression score or whatever. It could have a really complex scoring thing that there's no way you could do in REDCap. But you can write a program that sucks the data out, runs it through your custom black box, generates your summary numbers, and pushes that data back into REDCap. And we've done that in a number of instances. And it's been really powerful and saved a lot of time. Then the plugins, I'll give a few examples. Then there's a number of other features and I think I've got examples of some of those coming up. So how do you get started for the 20 or 30% of you that haven't already, or for those that need a little more help? You just log in. It's almost Friday. I say the training video works best Friday evening with a glass of wine or beer. And you click on that 78-minute video, and Vita will explain how REDCap works. It's a good start. There's a number of other shorter videos that are targeted to different features. And then after that, you've got the help and FAQ, which that's the official one. And then we have our own FAQ, which is much worse. It's much more outdated, but you can go there because there are a few things. And I'll send a very condescending email to you if you ask me a question that's on the FAQ. And then step 3 is you can email us, which is emailing me. And I'm happy to answer your questions and meet with you and help you get started. So I think the best way to do things is to learn by doing them. There's way too much in here to give a comprehensive talk about it, so we're just going to do something real simple. And I have a study idea in mind that I've been thinking a lot about. I think it's going to be a big publication. And so I think that there might be a correlation between someone's BMI and how much they crave nachos. Now, I don't know whether it's an inverse correlation or not, but I do believe that there is a correlation there. And then I'm going to make a second supposition, which is that the male machismo effect is going to say when it comes to do you like jalapenos on your nachos, the guys are going to like, yeah, I can take it, and they're going to step up and check that box. So those are my 2 hypotheses, and I'm now going to go ahead and see if I can't build a REDCap project that's going to help me answer these questions. So let's see if this is going to work. And you guys see what I'm doing? It looks like it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm logged into REDCap. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to call this the BMI Nacho Proj. And boy, that's really hard to read, isn't it? Let me see. So I'm going to say this is for fun and create a project. All right. And when you first make a project, you'll see that there are some tabs across the top with some of the big sections. There's a lot of stuff on the left. These are all little applications or features within your project that you can do. But when you're starting, you go to the project setup tab, and there's a link to it here, and there's also a link on the left side. And you walk down, and you sort of go through these boxes, and you can go ahead and click I'm done and it turns green. And that sort of, the idea is to sort of visually walk you through the steps to configure your project. I'm going to start real simple. So I'm just going to go ahead. I enable auto numbering, which means that it just auto numbers my records 1, 2, 3, 4. I find that the best practice. I don't like using PHI in my record names because then it shows up in your browser URL. So if you use MRN as your record ID, then every computer you look at and you view REDCap information, it's going to have MRNs cached in the browser history. So I don't like to do that. We go to the online designer, and this is where you define your forms, your CRFs, your instruments. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use something called the shared library because I think my research project is something that other people have probably thought of before. It's a very intuitive question. And so it turns out, indeed, there is a survey in the research library about nachos. Now, I could be doing something like, PROMIS is a very NIH-funded, standardized survey format. There's a lot of PROMIS instruments that you can go ahead and download. But I am searching for nachos, and voila, there it is. All right, so I'm going to take that instrument. I could preview it, but I know it's what I want. I'm going to import it into my project. And I say, yes, I agree, and I'm going to call this the nacho craving assessment. There we go. Go back to my previous page, and now here I am. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this default first instrument because I don't really want it. And I'm just going to have the nacho craving. I'm going to open it up. You'll notice the first field in my project is my record ID. Every REDCap project usually starts out with a record. It used to be called study ID, and this is your sort of your record number, your record name. You don't want to delete that. Now it kind of prevents you from deleting it. That's the main key that holds all your data together. So you want to treat it with respect. You don't want to rename it to another variable name once you've added data, because then it's going to orphan all of your data. So in order to do this study, I'm going to add some questions. This is using the online designer. These are the different types of questions I can add. It's probably about a fifth the size of what you can do in Qualtrics, but it kind of covers most of what people want to do. So I'm going to start with just a text box. I'm going to say, what's your first name? And I'm going to call the variable is all under lowercase and underscores for spaces. And I recommend you put some thought into how you want to name your variables in your projects. If you have a lot of them, hundreds of them, I oftentimes do it sort of by grouping. So let's say I've got 50 questions around demographics. I might go D underscore and then have the name of the variable. And then I might have medical history, MH underscore. And that way, when you're exporting all of your data, you can just quickly glance at all of your different field names. And you can kind of tell what group they're in. And I can show some examples if anybody has questions about that. Here's validation. So even though I'm just doing a text question, there's a number of ways that I can validate this text. I can validate it as a date time, as a date time with seconds, integer, numbers, phone numbers, zip codes, and we can also add custom ones. So here's an example of a project where they really wanted to have 4 text characters, A through Z, a hyphen, then another text character, and then 3 digits. And if you try to do anything other than that, it doesn't let you. So we can write our own custom validators too. So I'm going to put this in, first name, then we need to know if I'm going to tell whether or not men are more machismo with spicy stuff, then I'm going to need to figure that out. So I'm going to add a radio button question, and I'm going to say 1 for male, 2 for female. So anytime you do radio questions or checkbox questions, you're storing a coded value in the database. You're not storing the text label for the value. So in this case, my text label is male, but my coded value is 1. And so if you export your data in the raw format, you're just going to see 1s and 2s and 3s. And so you want to think about how you want those numbers to work. If you have a list that's going to be expanding, I see this all the time. Someone has a list of the surgeon that did the procedure. And they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they make 6 other. And then after 2 months, a new surgeon comes in, and they're like, oh, I got to start doing that one. So they change 6 from other to Dr. Smith, and then they make 7 other. When you make a change like that, if you think about the database, it's got all these 6s, and all of a sudden 6 no longer means other, it means Dr. Smith, and you've just recoded all the other patients to this new doctor. And so there are some things you got to be a little careful about, and there's some help. And the good news is when you're in production mode, RedCap will prevent you, well, it'll send an email to me and I'll try and prevent you from doing these sorts of changes. So you don't need to be too worried about it, but things to think about. We'll call this sex, save. Then I'm gonna go ahead and add height. And I like to put units for any measure. So let's do height in what, centimeters? And, oh, I did a radio button. I don't want a radio button. I want a text box. There we go. Height in centimeters. I could validate this as just an integer. I don't want people to give me decimals. Let's round to the nearest centimeter. Save that. Then I'm going to go ahead and add one more field, weight. And in this case, let's say in kilograms. Sure.
One thing you're all aware of is you all need to have data dictionaries, which basically tell you the definitions of each of the fields. And, you know, in the past, we always sort of kept separate files for these definitions, or let's call it definition dictionary. You can build that into your field note. And if you're going to have multiple people entering data, it's a really good idea to have all your definitions here. And then that way you're not, you know, and if you update your definition or, you know, refine it, then at least everybody that's entering data is going to be able to see that.
So we could, yeah, we could go ahead and put parentheses and say this is the email address. And then if you want, if you know HTML, you can go ahead and you can font size, smaller. You can go ahead and you can use HTML in here as well.
And so another example would be like, you know, when weight and height, you know, well, when is the weight and height? At the time that the patient first came to you, or is it their max weight and height? So those are the kinds of things we want to build into that field.
Then I'm going to break the nacho questions into a separate section. So there's a thing called the section header, and I'm going to say nacho section. All right, so now we have all that in. I can be, oh, you know, I want that to be bigger. I'm going to make it a heading, an H3 label. And now it's going to be even bigger. So I've got my basic assessment put together. So let's return to my questions. So I want to go ahead and I want to collect this data. You can either do it in paper and do data entry, but that's really painful. Why not just have the people submit it directly? And in this case, it's a public survey. So I'm going to go ahead back to my project setup. I'm going to make this a survey. Then I go back to my online designer. And I'm going to enable this as a survey. So now this form, that was a data entry form, I've just turned it into a survey. That means it now has a URL, and people from outside that don't have RedCap accounts, that don't have SUNET IDs, are able to fill this information in if they get the proper link. So let's see, I'm going to turn off question numbering. I don't care much for question numbering. I can add a logo to the top of the survey, so I think I have one here. So I'm going to put that in, and there's a number of other options. You can do save and continue later for very long surveys. But I've got it going, and now I've got this new feature, Manage Survey Participants. And so I have a URL for my survey. And if I go in and I make that URL, save it. Hopefully it's saved. Oh no. Let's do one quick. Cheating here. All right, so that's done. So now, if we go back to our talk and mess up our resolution, if you have a phone, go ahead and see if you can type this into your phone. But it is case sensitive, so the N and the M have to be uppercase. But bit.ly, not show me. And you should, hopefully, be taking this survey. So let's see what happens if I click on it. Oh, yep, looks like we're getting there. Let's go back and fix our resolution. And so we can go through and take this. So I can say, what is my first name? Is Andy. I'm male. What is my height in centimeters? Oh boy. 2.54 times, what, 72, 6 feet plus 2 inches, 74, is that right?
You can actually plug that formula into there so the person can enter inches and it'll automatically convert to 70.
Okay, that's probably pretty, I'm gonna say 99. Okay. Uh-oh. What did I do wrong? 99 isn't the expected format? Okay, hold on. Hold on. Hold on, what did I do wrong? Let's fix it. Don't submit yet. Let's go down to weight, edit, weight, number. Oh, I forced it to 1 decimal place. I didn't realize it did that. I thought it said up to 1. So it looks like you may have to do 99.0, or if you refresh now, I just fixed it, so if you refresh, it should go away. So I'm going to say 99.0. And email, I'm going to put in my email address. And have you ever eaten nachos? But of course, do I use them? Yes, I use them to treat my other, my nacho craving disorder. Okay, I last ate nachos. It's been a while. So anyways, you can go through and you can answer all these questions. You're seeing some questions pop up. That's called branching logic, where they show up depending on what's going on into previous questions. Okay, so I can submit that, and voila. So has anyone else been able to submit their nacho survey? If it doesn't take your weight, just add a decimal point. Put like .0, .1. I messed that up, I apologize. So let's go through and let's see what's going on. Let's take a look at our survey participants. So I can look at our record status dashboard. We have 2 people, so I'm not the only one. At least some other people have gone through. Keep working on it. And so you can now get a little fancier. So we've collected a bunch of data from patients. You can now do things like go longitudinal. You can go ahead and you can convert this project over into a longitudinal project where you're going to collect the same CRF on multiple occasions. So I'm going to very quickly go back into my project and figure out how to stop PowerPoint from doing that. And now that I'm back in my project, I can go to project setup again. And I can say, you know what, I'm going to enable longitudinal data capture. I really want to capture this information on more than one occasion. And I can go ahead then and I could set up events. I could say, I want to capture this after the nacho intervention, where we explain all the bad things that nachos do. So this could be my post-intervention time point. And I'm leaving the days off for now. That's if you want to do scheduling. REDCap can help you maintain a study calendar and help you maintain when your patients are due if they're offset for various events. Then I need to go ahead and say I want to collect the nacho craving index post-intervention. And now that I have all that information, I can go back and I can do one more thing. I can say, you know what? They gave me an email field, which I forgot to validate as an email, I think. Let's go back. And had I validated my email address right here as an email, now if I go back to my project setup, I can say that I want to use that email address to send out future surveys. So now I can already take those of you that submitted your data, and I can, in one fell swoop, come in and I can say, I'm going to send out my post-intervention survey to those people. So some people didn't submit an email, some people did. I can go ahead and say compose an invitation. It's going to grab all those email addresses. And I can say post-intervention assessment. And you can use piping, which is a new feature. I can say dear, and then in square brackets, first name. And if you gave me your first name, it's going to show up in this email template. Please complete the post-intervention assessment, and then it's going to include the link automatically. I could say when I want this sent and go ahead and send the emails. And so all of those that completed it should get an email in a second, and you could click on it and fill out your second half of the data. You can also do automated invitations, so you can set up criteria when you don't have everybody doing it at once. When you want time points and people are enrolling over a long period of time, you can keep a sort of regimented survey scale. There's a lot of things you can do with the surveys. So we've got a few more minutes until I'm going to turn it over. And what I'm going to do is just give you a flyby of some of the more complex things that you can do so that you've seen it. I don't think I'm going to do the SAS export, but you can take this data and you can dump it straight into SAS if you do that, or SPSS or Excel. There's a number of different ways that you can do it. And now there's the API functionality. And so there is a way, although we haven't done it very often, where you can even use the API to just regenerate a report without having to re-export the data manually. So let's say you're in a big study and every week you get together as a group and you want to see the latest numbers. You could set up this automated report and just hit run on SAS, kick out the report, and you'd be all set to go and look like a pro. So, as I said, the data dictionary, that's what you call all of your questions and the types. You can do the online editor, which is what I've been doing for the past few minutes. But if you're doing a lot of repetitive stuff, or if you already have a lot of questions, you can also edit your data dictionary in Excel as a CSV file. And so oftentimes people will have a chunk that they want to repeat. It's great to just pull it up in Excel, copy the column, or copy the rows, paste them, and then rename the actual variable field names, because those have to be unique. So if you ever feel yourself saying there's got to be a better way to do this, there probably is. So please don't be a martyr. Come send an email and ask for help, and we'll find a smarter way to do it.
And then one other thing, if you're taking a database, like for example, if you have a Qualtrics database and you want to convert it to REDCap, just take the data dictionary from Qualtrics or from what other database you have and adjust it, and then upload it into REDCap. It makes it very easy. You don't have to reinvent your database. Just reformat it.
So as I showed you, validation, this is painful. Okay, it's not a lot of fun to sit there and do the validation up front. But if it's especially if it's a long-term project, it's really a pain well spent, because if you don't do it, when it comes time to analyze the data, you're going to have a nightmare in most cases. So this is something that's painful. It takes testing to get it right. I should have tested my survey before I sent it out to the world. But it's worth the effort in the long run. There's this whole idea of identifiers. You can mark certain questions as PHI, and then you can grant some people access to your project that say they cannot export the PHI. So most statisticians actually don't want the PHI. They don't even want to have access to it. They just want the data to crunch the numbers. And so REDCap helps you do that. There are some caveats. It doesn't work perfectly. They're going to improve it, but it is there. Let's see, branching logic. You can basically hide and show questions, based on whether or not the question applies. And you can get really complicated with this. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can then mess it up terribly and be stuck with all these error boxes. Who's been there? Anybody? So I recommend that you hold off on the branching logic until the end. Then, unless it comes to you intuitively and you get it, come see me and we'll do a couple together and help you get started on it. But don't do too much branching early on. And branching is really only helpful if you have naive users that are doing the data entry, right? If everybody's a pro and they know what applies and what doesn't apply, then you really don't need to spend the time doing it. Just have them fill it in. You can do file attachments. So I like the idea of having everything for a project in one place. And REDCap can be that one place. You can attach files globally to the project, like protocols. You can attach files per field to a record. So you can attach a scanned PDF of the consent form. You can have people submit resumes or publication lists, whatever it is, you can collect documents. Currently we cap it at 32 megabytes, so it's not intended to be like a file repository for your sequencing data, but we're trying to find ways to do larger data sets for videos and things like that. Then I showed you a little bit about the idea of longitudinal, where here's a case where you have longitudinal, you have different events in your study, you can go out for years, and you can have different surveys or things automatically happen at those times. and then you can enroll whatever forms you want only for those events for which they apply. And then you can even take this one step further and do arms, where you can take your study and break it into placebo or substance A or B, and it can get pretty complicated. There's a lot of user rights that are not very intuitive. They finally added user roles, which means you can define a role, and if you're going to have a lot of people on your project, you can take half a dozen people and throw them into one role, and that way you only have to administer the permissions once. You don't have to do it for every user. If you have questions about these, read the help or come see me. They're kind of difficult. Data access groups is a really cool feature if you're collaborating with other people. You can, in this example, we have collaborators at a number of different institutions. They're all entering data in Stanford's REDCap instance, but we want to make sure that the patients that Michigan are entering are not visible by the other institutions. They're only visible by those people that are sort of the overall administrators for the project. So you can use this to do all sorts of segmenting of your data from a permissions level. Because it's HIPAA compliant, it logs everything, every page view, every save, everything you do is logged. So if there's ever a question about how did that record change, you can click on the history button and get a full log of what happened. And there's even a new feature. Here's an example of the field history. You can require people to submit, this is optional, why they made changes. So if you have a project where you really don't want people changing things unless they absolutely have to, you can make them type in a reason. And then they have this new thing called the data resolution workflow. If you're having, say, a bunch of undergrads do data entry, you've collected all this stuff on paper, and they have a question, they can't read a number, or they think, like in this case, I think maybe they entered their weight or their height in the wrong units. Should I correct it? Should I make that assumption? They can essentially open a trouble ticket. It's like a ticket on that data entry that you as an administrator can view all the tickets. You can click in and see the record in the field. You can then resolve it and make a decision. So it's a nice way to have people that aren't intimate with the data do the data entry and then leave all the tough decisions for you so that they don't make an assumption that you wouldn't make. Plugins, if anyone got a text message back a year and a half ago or whatever during the encryption process, I wrote a plugin that allowed us to send text messages. So from a project, you could just click once, and if there was a telephone number field in the project, it would automatically generate a template. You just push send, and it would send a text message. So that's an example of a plugin. For Sean Mackey's group, we made pain maps. So these are these interactive maps where the patient on the iPad can just touch where it hurts, or they can click where it hurts. This is an example of sort of enhancing REDCap to do something it doesn't normally do. And then here's the API where you can you generate a token, which is like a username and password for your project, and there's a whole documentation list where you can pull the questions, the data, all that stuff. Here's an example of a long-term automated survey project where they're sending the patient a link to this survey every week for a long period of time. It actually goes way over up there to the top of the room. And then we're doing this auto-continuing feature where it's really multiple surveys, but the patient just sees it as one survey. So they just kind of march through and take all 4 of these instruments. And then once a month, they actually take a couple extra instruments. And as soon as they complete them, they get scheduled, so they'll get an email a week later with the next set. So all the project admin has to do is just kind of keep an eye on the patients and figure out which ones haven't responded to their survey email and resend it or give them a call to find out why. Here's a way of doing one-to-many forms. In this case, these are pregnancies, and we're looking to see what happens in REI, and you might have a number of ultrasounds that occur in the REI's office. It depends on how many you have. They don't know. They said, we think 6 is the most we're going to have. Here's a patient that had 5, and then you have other things that you measure only once, and then here's all the visits. For each visit, there's vitals that get acquired. And because we're collecting the data this way, it's really easy for us to, like, for example, do a plot of the patient's weight over time. Because all the data is collected here longitudinally. And then they created one box for each infant that came out of the pregnancy. And these ones just aren't being used for this record, but for a different record, they might be used. Okay, so common questions. Why can't I do more reporting in REDCap? And my answer is it's for data capture. It can do some reporting, but not a lot. If you want to do a lot of reporting, take it to R or SPSS or SAS. You can collaborate. You just need to sponsor them for SUNET accounts. It's free. There's wiki entries on how to do that. There's this thing called production. You can move your project into production, and that helps to prevent you from accidentally deleting data by sending an email to me. The downside is it means you have to wait 24 hours typically for your change to be approved. So people all the time ask me, when should I do this? And I say when losing your data would be painful. So I've gotten a number of calls at 2 in the morning, or not a number, I've gotten a call at 2 in the morning on a Saturday by someone who said, my wife is so distraught that she can't even call you, she can't speak. She just accidentally deleted the data. Oh my gosh, and it turned out it wasn't that big of a deal, so we were able to fix it. All right, so can you get help? Yes, you can get help, and I do a lot of consulting, or not consulting, but paid things if I have time. I just don't have that much time. We're hoping to get more staff, but we have a lot of groups that say, you know what, I just want to have somebody really help get my project going and get it going in the right direction, and so they'll budget 20 hours or 30 hours, and then I'll come to a couple meetings and I'll sort of sit there and help get the thing going. We don't own the projects, we really want you guys to own them, but I want to help you get them set up correctly. There's our website, and you can also click this button in the middle to get a hold of us. And all right, sorry, I might have gone a little bit long, but
That's great. So that was an excellent overview, and I think he showed you a lot of the features I was going to show you, but maybe what I'll do is just pull up some of the projects I've done and tell you about some key learning points that I've learned, and then go from there. So in order to access, do you guys know how to access the REDCap? You just, in your browser, redcap.stanford.edu. You know what? I don't know how to use the Mac. Okay. I might need your help.
so the most important thing we do is I hit save site so that I can know your password forever.
Oh.
So the two-step authentication is something that any collaborators, if you do that, they're going to have to go through. Does anybody use the printed list of two-step authentication? Nobody? Oh. Get rid of the printed list. Go to the SMS. If you work in the bowels of the hospital and can't get text messages, you can install the Google Authenticator app. So the printed list is a bane of support.
Okay, so we'll go to My Projects, which is a list of all your REDCap database. So I just,
You just push hard.
oh, I see, okay. Okay, so here are my projects. So this first project was actually a fellow project, and we had the hypothesis that, well, actually, there was a publication that showed ferritin levels greater than 10,000 was highly associated, or actually sensitive and specific for this syndrome called macrophage activation syndrome. And we wanted to see whether we were missing the diagnosis at Stanford. So we asked the STRIDE team to pull a list of patients that have ever had a ferritin level greater than 10,000. And the nice thing is that they actually were able to give me an Excel sheet with a lot of the data that I needed, included in the ferritin levels, the dates, the demographics, and we were able to just upload it into our project here. So I can't actually show you a lot because I have patient information in there, but I'll just put a new one just so you could see the form. So here you can see all this data just came from STRIDE, so it uploaded. We didn't have to do the data entry. So with this project, or with all projects, actually, you can do something called the report builder, where this is where you can make reports, and then down below here, actually, yeah, it's off the screen.
I don't think there's anything over where you're trying to find.
Oh, right here. So then you go down here to reports, and those are all the reports you've made. So this is great if you're just having meetings and you want to kind of discuss where your data is. I mean, ultimately, you're going to download this into a statistical analysis program, but, for example, I just made this quick report that showed, the patient ID, what was the primary underlying disease, did the patient have the diagnosis of HLH, whether it's complete or incomplete, and whether or not the patient died. But anyways, you can have a number of fields in these reports, and they're very easy and quick to build. So let me go to another database. How do you go page up? Sorry. Oh, no. Sorry, I don't usually work with a Mac, so this is a little different. So this pediatric lupus project, so this was a project I started as a fellow, and 3 other fellows have sort of added on to it. So that's another nice thing about this is, once you build a database, people can add on to it. And you can also copy it. So say another investigator comes along, and we had this happen in our department, where they wanted a lot of my data, but they wanted to change some definitions, and they wanted to make alterations to the database. And so they just copied my database and then made their alterations, and now they have their own database. So that's another thing you can do. So if you have a project that's similar to somebody else's project, you can ask them to copy their database. So what else on the lupus project? So here's some more. You scroll down.
Sorry. It's a 2-finger thing.
Oh, 2 fingers, huh. Okay, so then here's a bunch of, reports that I have here. So I did this practice one for you guys. So again, is this patient in the study? So it's very good in your databases to actually have a field in there. Is this patient included in the study? And in this case, this lupus database, since it expanded into 3 or 4 other projects, we actually have questions. Is this, does the patient included in the ethnicity study? Is the patient included in the fungal study? Is the patient included in the AVN study? And then that way, the person that's doing the AVN study can say, please, or make a report, say, I want all the patients that are in my study. So, and then that's also important for, downloading the data into a statistical analysis program. You don't want to download the data from another study. You just want the patients that are pertaining to your study. So what are some other?
So that is a common theme, that if you work in a big lab, you have sort of a cohort of patients that have like a disorder, and you're doing a number of studies based on them to create one project that holds sort of the consistent information about that cohort, and then for each particular study, create a child project that just links back to that main project. Well, this is patient 55. And then you don't need to re-enter all their demographic information, their date of birth, all that other stuff. You keep that in the main one, and that way you don't, repeat and do this multiple data entry.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, as a fellow, I built the demographics, the baseline lupus, and then another fellow came along and created this vasculopathy score that she was testing on certain outcomes. And then both of us sort of added in various treatment sort of fields, and then we had the outcomes fields. So anyways, it was very helpful to sort of keep all of these forms within the same database. And I don't know if you've used this database a long time ago. It was actually very time consuming to toggle between each of these pages of your data entry form, so between these forms, and now it's much faster. So in the past, I used to not break up my my database into different forms because it just took so long between. But now you should break it up as much as possible, because when you're going through a patient's chart, you might have one piece of data that you want to quickly go to this form, and then you might want to go back to another form. In the past, we often used paper to keep track of the data we were collecting, but we're more and more trying to just go from collecting the data in the chart directly to the REDCap data. So by having different forms, it makes it faster to find the field. Yeah, so let's go back here. So this LSV study, so this is a head ultrasound finding. So one interesting thing that I did with Stride is I actually had them give me all of the patient medical record numbers that had this ultrasound finding. And then I had them find controls. So basically age-matched kids that had head ultrasounds but didn't have that finding. And then I had them load them all up into the data review tool, but, and then we loaded up all of those medical record numbers, medical record numbers. Because so if you're using the data review tool, you need to know what the medical records are. So we put them all into our REDCap database, but then I blinded my data collector. So he didn't know which of the patients in this big cohort had the head ultrasound finding. And that's very nice because, as you know, there's a lot of bias. So if you believe in your hypothesis, you're going to look harder for certain things when you know what the outcome is. So by not informing the data collector on which patients had the finding, they could do it blindly. And then they had a list of search terms that they were using to go through and collect data. And on that list of search terms, I excluded the search terms for this particular head ultrasound finding. So that's something you might want to think about instead of breaking up into controls and your cases. Just keep them all in one file. And then the last thing I just wanted to show you. So the longitudinal data. So here, so you mentioned that you can keep them all in the same database. So when we built this, it wasn't possible. This is when it first came out. So we had our pediatric lupus project, and then we had another fellow come along and wanted to add a longitudinal component to it. So this was that particular database. And you can kind of see, here's the dashboards. This record status dashboard is basically kind of looking at all of the, oh wait, whoops, sorry, I can't show that to you. Sorry. Close your eyes, it has patient information. Anyways, I can't show that to you, but that's longitudinal data, and we had to keep it as a separate, so I don't know if that's...
There's a lot of things that, there are new features that come out every couple months when we release it. So if you have a really old project that was really painful, it might have been fixed,
Okay,
feel free to come in.
Yeah, so we had it as a separate database, but it was still linked by the study ID number. So I don't know, unfortunately a lot of these have patient information, so I can't show you too many details, but do you have any questions for me as someone that was a user? Yeah.
For the situation where you blinded your person doing data entry, did you do that by masking that field as PHI and then not giving them permission?
So they were blinded in the data collection phase. So they would go into the data review tool. Have you used the data review tool?
No.
Oh, okay, so this is great. This is a database that basically contains all of the typed records from a patient chart. And then there's a search field. So for example, I would say, okay, like there's a whole bunch of questions, but one of the questions is, did this baby have hypotonia? So they type hypotonia in the search field, and then anywhere in the chart that the word hypotonia shows up, then they would say, okay, yes, the patient had hypotonia. But what I did was they were blinded because I told them they cannot search on the terms for the lenticular striate vasculopathy.
Yeah, there's one in REDCap. If you wish to hide certain fields from some users, they don't have field level permissions. There's a couple ways you can kind of do it, but there are some tricky nuances. So if you want to do that, I recommend you come and see me, because you have to make sure that they don't have access to certain combinations of features that might allow them to see a field that you intend to hide from them. You can make it hard pretty easily. To make it foolproof is almost impossible. So if you really want to do that, what we sometimes do is break it into two projects, have the PHI that's sensitive in one project, and then have the other stuff in another project, and that user just doesn't have access to that at all. But when you do data analysis, you can pull them both and link them together.
And one other thing to keep in mind when you're building databases is that the person entering data should always enter something. And there's always going to be situations where they're not sure what to enter. So, for example, I don't know, okay, the hypotonia, maybe there are some conflicting records in the baby's chart as to whether they had hypotonia or not. So you should have the answer, yes, they had hypotonia, no, they didn't have hypotonia, or unsure. And then that's different than just a blank field, because ultimately all the blank fields are missing data that you'd want to go back and kind of search for that. So maybe somebody inadvertently skipped that question. So there should always be a field that, something in the field that they answer. And then a lot of times, so sometimes there is missing data. So for the lupus study, we order, double-stranded DNA on all our lupus patients. But maybe there was a patient that I couldn't find the double-stranded DNA result because maybe they got it at Kaiser and somehow it just never got recorded in the system. Well, that would be missing data, and that would be, you know, and so for missing data, we frequently use the number 99999, and that always indicates missing data. And that way, you know, when you look at your Excel spreadsheet or when you'll always know that 99999 means missing data. Any other questions?
Anything else before I release all of your email addresses? Spam engines, magazine subscriptions.
Thanks so much. You have refreshments outside.
Thank you.
I didn't realize your wife was a doctor.
Yeah. Marina Martin,
What, on the adult side?
geriatrics.
Oh, okay.